Together, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashai, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, and Sri Patanjali, we bow at your feet. We open our hearts to your presence, our minds to your wisdom, and our hands to thy service. Om. Peace. Amen. Thy name I will drink, thy name, get all drunk or with thy name. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk or with thy name. Om Guru, Om Guru, Om, Om Guru, Om Guru, Om Guru, Om. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk or with thy name. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk or with thy name. Om Jesus, Om Jesus, Om, Om Jesus, Om Jesus, Om Jesus, Om. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. I will sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri, Om. Om Lahiri, Om Babaji, Om Babaji, Om. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. I will sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri, Om. Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri, Om Lahiri, Om. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. I will sing thy name, I will drink thy name, get all drunk with thy name. Sri Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. Yogananda, 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 sing thy name, and get all drunk with thy name. Sing thy name, I will drink thy name, get all drunk with thy name. Patanjali Om, Patanjali Om, Om Hari Om, Babaji Om, Babaji Om, Om Master Om, Master Om, Om. Just have a moment or two of silence, chanting in our hearts to the great ones who make wisdom teachings possible and practical. In this season of gratitude, open our hearts in gratitude for their service to humanity and for the opportunity to be instruments of their grace and wisdom to all whom we meet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Amen. So this is our next to the last class. Next week, being our last Patanjali class, we'll present a summary of books 3 and 4, which I warned at the beginning of this course were secondary to the first two books for our purposes. Book 3, Vibhuti, has to do with the powers that arise, the siddhis and so forth, and book 4 is a bit of a summation and an attempt to describe the more ultimate states, which has been done aplenty thus far. So tonight we'll read some, but not all, the stanzas in the Sanskrit as we have, and we're going to try and make a courageous attempt to cover the remainder of Book 2, about half the remainder. I think we ended somewhere around 15 or so more than half actually. And then, so our discussion period will be shorter than last time. I didn't receive any questions anyway this week, though I sent some out. Repeated some of the ones we didn't touch from the week before. So that's kind of our agenda this evening. Welcome back from St. Louis. Okay.
Welcome back, Morley.
Welcome back, Morley, from the shortest trip to India known to Indians.
Good wedding? How many days? 3?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're going to start, aren't we, with stanza 15. So let's begin.
Parinama tapa samskara dukhair gunavritti virodhacha dukkhameva sarva vivekinaha. Indeed, to any one of discrimination, everything experienced by the body is painful, for every desire, once satisfied, is followed by fear of loss. It produces ever new cravings in the mind, and desire results in the conflict between the three gunas. desire results in the conflict between the three gunas.
A recurring theme in Book 2 is the nature of creation, the delusory nature of creation, described as the gunas and their interplay. And from the result of that, or as a other side of the coin of that, is the whole process of karma and working out karma. But here Patanjali gives an insight that I suppose some of us get glimpses of, though unfortunately probably only in our disillusionment or down moments, but I think is indicative of a very high state of realization. And there's a line in that wonderful movie of Padre Pio. How many of you have seen that just beautiful movie? It's not for the devotee who is a faint of heart. It's only for the true devotee, so I warn you. But there's a point in there when he turns and whispers to forget who, and he says to his friend, I can visualize him, but I can't think of his name. He says, it is all sin. And that's sort of a Catholic Christian way of saying things, but it's exactly what Patanjali is saying. Whether it's pleasure or pain, it's all illusory. And it's said that until we, on a soul level, realize a truth intuitively, then we're perforce required to struggle with it. We might understand it, as we try to do here, intellectually, and we might get glimpses intuitively of the resonance of that truth. But until we're really there, and it's of the knowing, we might only be lucky enough to get glimpses. But it can be a worthwhile thing to meditate on, as I say, most likely when we're discouraged, unfortunately, but the thought that even our successes in life, even our fulfilled desires in life, even our hopes and ambitions and so forth, our pleasures, simply sow seeds of their opposites. Sow seeds of additional cravings, sow seeds of the loss of that enjoyment, the inevitable loss of it, and so forth. Everything we strive for through the Maya of this world is bound to disappoint us. Stated only intellectually, it just means nothing really to most of us. And so it has to be experienced intuitively, which is why I feel that the statement comes from a very high level of realization. He also talks about the conflict of the gunas, which Swami mentions is a bit perplexing. And it touches on something that weaves itself through here and through Swami's teachings also, which is the conundrum, the paradox, at least it's an intellectual paradox, it's not a soul paradox, that how is it that virtue itself cannot free us? How is it that sattva guna cannot free us? Even though we admit that it's better to be virtuous, it's better to be sattvic and calm and enlightened and so forth and so on, expansive in our consciousness, certainly, surely, that's obvious. If it wasn't that, we all just go home. But it's not enough. It seems like sort of a bummer. It doesn't seem fair to us. We could be the most virtuous person, and as I've said in prior classes, there are many good people, virtuous people out there. But they're not necessarily on the road to liberation because there's something else needed. The play of good karma is such that it's simply good karma. And if it's only good karma, meaning you retain the sense of doership in your virtue, in your success, then it's simply like money in the bank, and someday you're going to use it up and have to start over again. In a way, it's a depressing thought. But it's not intended to be depressing. It's intended to be enlightening, to understand that the way out comes from above, comes from superconsciousness, comes through the power of the Guru. And when we start to cling to that, our virtues don't mean as much. Sure, we have some virtues, but look at some of those devotees of masters who are cantankerous or problematic, and look at what our beloved Swamiji experienced in his lifetime at their hands, even all the while admitting they were advanced souls. I mean, if that's either depressing or it's humbling, and it ought to be humbling. We should seek the divine and never mind about so much, never trouble ourselves so much about our flaws or even our virtues. Work on them as best we can. But it's not really the solution. And that's an insight of a devotee you're not going to find in a church. You're not going to find in most scriptures, most sermons and so forth. That's a revelation for true devotees, because it can be misused. Okay? It can be used to justify wrong action. And even great spiritual, so-called great spiritual teachers, or I should say popular ones, have been led astray by that otherwise deep insight. Okay. Stanza 17, is that me?
That's you.
Okay. We're not going to, are we reading 17? Yes.
You're
Yeah.
all the way through 30.
Yeah, are we reading 17? Okay, let's read 17.
The cause of that avoidable pain is the union of that which sees and that which is seen. The cause of that avoidable pain is the union of that which sees and that which is seen.
The fact is, the prior stanza points out that success and failure, pleasure and pain, both are illusory or delusory, is not intended to have us turn our backs on the creation, which is a gift of God. We can enjoy all things with the joy of God. That's a different teaching and is given elsewhere. But here, then, he continues this thought. The junction, the union of the seer with the seen. We think of the seen as the universe, the five senses, all the impressions we have, the thoughts we have, our past and our hopes and desires and so forth. And those things are all seen. But by whom? And the seer is that, Patanjali is telling us, is that indwelling soul untouched by all that is seen. And the union that he refers to is the union of identification, mental identification. You know how Master says more practically and more comprehensively for our minds, he says the ego is the soul identified with the body. A little easier for most of us to grasp than some of this language. And so to the degree that we identify with the ups and downs, the feelings, etc., the impressions that we have in life, to that extent, then that union means we experience pain, at least in the sort of existential sense, the soul sense, that it is not real and fleeting. And that which is not real and fleeting, at least to the soul, even though you may be enjoying your favorite mango or something, but to the soul those things are meaningless because they have no reality. They are not ever new, ever existent, ever conscious bliss that cannot be taken from us. They are ephemeral. So from the soul's standpoint, all such impressions, experiences, are by their nature, this is what he means by pain, meaning they cannot give us the fulfillment innate in our soul nature. Reminded me of the joke. I can't remember the whole joke, but you'll hopefully laugh anyway. It's the Dalai Lama or the Buddhist or somebody who says, I want to transcendental medication and practice transcendental meditation. And of course it's in this thing where Swami once again inflicts upon us his unending story about not taking Novocaine, which I'm really tired of hearing about because I have no intention of not taking Novocaine. So it causes only pain to have to reread it. Then he talks about the wishing well that fell on Master's foot and how Master demonstrated to the people there that he put his mind here at the spiritual eye and was able to transcend that pain. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But then he segues into something I feel is much more important that I wish we had time to explore, but we don't, which is how a master takes on the karma of disciples. And we're not going to explore that tonight because he doesn't really, he only mentions it in passing. But he says something that I want to point your attention to. He describes, I won't say define, he describes attunement as compassionate identification with the Guru. Isn't that an interesting phrase? I'd never heard that before. Compassionate identification with the Guru. You think of the life. I think of Christians in the imitation of Christ, for example, a long-standing history in the great disciples of Christ down through 2,000 years who would, relive the Passion, like Teresa Neumann. I mean, those are all very dramatic, but really to relive the life of the Guru, to every word, every facial expression, every example given in Autobiography of a Yogi as an example, or in Swami's stories. That compassionate identification. We say on Sunday in the Festival of Light how the Masters sacrificed, don't we, to come into incarnation, to take on the human form, to experience the pangs and the joys and the sorrows of human life. That level of compassion, which is to say wisdom, to understand that there's even a need to be compassionate for what the gift they... I mean, most people just take and take and take. Oh, give me Kriya, give me Kriya. Oh, I really find that book interesting, or, so forth. They never think about the human experience of the Guru. Again, these are insights for true devotees, to think with compassion what these great ones have gone through. We just think, oh yeah, he came to America. Well, wasn't that easy? When you read with discernment his life and stories, you realize the prejudices he went through, the sacrifices. So think about that. Meditate on compassionate identification with the life of Master and the other ones and so forth. And it'll deepen our attunement. Okay, 18 we don't read. I've already said the point there, the gunas. Sorry, I've got so many pieces of paper in front of me. The gunas cannot free us. They can point the way, however. Virtue points the way. Virtue puts us vibrationally more in touch with sattva guna. But that's all it can do. Everything in creation is a manifestation of the gunas, including our thoughts and feelings, our memories, as well as the objects of creation, reflecting in all the various ways. It's sort of like the wave. The wave, no matter where you are on the wave, or no matter where you are on a bar magnet where all the molecules are north-south, no matter where you are, you cut it and they're still north-south. No matter where you are in sattva guna, there's still rajaguna and there's still tamoguna. No matter where we are. Tri guna rahitam, as we sing in the hymn to Brahma. The Guru is above all the gunas, all the lila, the play of the different qualities. Only in transcendence, only in stillness can we be tri guna rahitam. Okay, and this is where Swami talks about, again, not using these teachings to reject the creation, but to enjoy all with the joy of God. Okay. Let's move on to 26. Uninterrupted conscious discernment. This is an interesting one. I want to look at it because although we're not officially reading it, there was something in there I wanted to refer to. Uninterrupted conscious discrimination is the best method for penetrating the veil of ignorance. And Swami's point there is not just introspection, not just wisdom, but something that I think I've already mentioned in this class series. If you got nothing else out of Raja Yoga or Learn to Meditate class, and I see some of our teachers here, nothing else but to focus your mind at the point between the eyebrows 24/7, you'd have enough. And that's essentially what Swami says there. This uninterrupted conscious discernment is what happens to one who is a master. Their consciousness is permanently affixed to the spiritual eye. We can do that every moment. There's nothing that stops us from 24/7, well, maybe not while we're sleeping, but certainly conscious meditation takes place. Now he adds to that something deeper, which he admits in the text is actually not that easy to do. And this has to do with the connection of the heart to the spiritual eye. It took me years of teaching meditation to finally tune into the fact, however subtle unfortunately it is in Swami's teachings and in Masters, that we start every meditation at the heart. And then I started teaching that actively because it's not really that clear in the textbooks that we share. Start the meditation at the heart and then move to the spiritual eye, always, without fail. And so he says here, during daily activity, let the natural love of the heart, the energy of the heart, flow constantly to the spiritual eye during your talking, during all of your waking moments, and you will be meditating always. And then he says, if you can't do that, like Krishna in the Gita, who gives us different things to do and we can't do this or that, then focus at this. What a beautiful teaching. I mean, if you got nothing more out of Patanjali, take it and run with it. It's a beautiful thing. Uninterrupted conscious discernment. Again, it's like when we're focused here, we don't have to think about, I have to be good, or I have to, what should I do? When we're more in that state, by practice, there's an uninterrupted flow of discernment, of wisdom, of right action, of right feeling, particularly when it's connected to the heart. What a great teaching. How practical. What comes after that? Oh, the 29. I think we're going to read here, aren't we? Yeah.
Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, jnana, samadhya, ashta angani. The 8 limbs of yoga are 1. Yama, self-denial. 2. Niyama, observance. 3. Posture. 4. Withdrawal of the energy. 5. Interiorization of the mind. 6. Concentration. 7. Meditation. 8. Absorption. Limbs of yoga are 1. Yama, self-denial. 2. Niyama, observance. 3. Posture. 4. Withdrawal of the energy. 5. Interiorization of the mind. 6. Concentration. 7. Meditation. 8. Absorption.
This is me.
You're first.
Okay. So he gives us finally the 8 limbs, and as we've pointed out in the past, that Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, it's not the first place in Indian teachings and scriptures that the 8 steps, the 8 limbs are actually mentioned. They are universal. They're not specific to yoga or indeed to India. They are limbs, and as such, like all of our limbs, they are all needed. Okay, they're not stages or steps merely on a ladder, and yet it's helpful for us to try to understand it in that way. And that makes it, of course, more holographic, more difficult, more three-dimensional or multi-dimensional in order to grasp and understand and introspect on the 8 limbs for us individually. But that's the way life is, complex and messy. They are stages of perfection. They're not specific practices. Much of what we've inherited in yoga teachings through the Kali Yuga, down and up and so forth, has been, as we find throughout yoga, in the different paths of yoga, but also here, we find kind of a misapplication of the essence of Patanjali, for which our masters were very clear about in this age, because these steps have been largely in Indian teachings identified with specific practices, giving rise to competing schools of thought, competing yoga lineages, each emphasizing this and that and calling themselves this and that, losing sight of the universality of the Eightfold Path. There are lineages, as I think we all know, that claim the Eightfold Path as their lineage, as if anyone could really do so. So we're blessed in this more expansive understanding of Patanjali. Moving on to the 5 yamas. We moved on to the 5 yamas. Again, they're primarily mental attributes, not specific actions. In the Raja text or elsewhere, Swami talks about how different religious sects down through the ages during the Kali Yuga have gotten so focused on not killing things or something, that they go through ridiculous measures to adhere in a literal way. Literalness is associated with Kali Yuga. The literalness of Christian fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism is born of a Kali Yuga consciousness in whatever age it appears, and that literalness is an aspect of it. So the don'ts are primarily mental attributes, and they're directional for us. So just a few points. These things I think this group has studied, in many ways. I think it's wrong, however, to think that we're above it all. Wrong to think we've overcome the do's and the don'ts. They just get more subtle. Because as Swami points out both in the Raja text and in Patanjali here, that if you perfect ahimsa, in a sense, he didn't say this, but in a sense you could say you don't need the other limbs, because they're holographic, perfection in one means perfection in all of them. So never think that because you don't lie, steal, or whatever, that somehow these are not meaningful. In fact, that's been the downside, I think, of yoga practiced in the West, is people jump over these two and start with asana and imagine somehow that these don't apply to them. Nonviolence, our masters have made it clear. We speak much about this here at Ananda, about it is not literal, and we do violence to vegetables when we eat cucumbers. We do violence to bugs when we drive around and so forth. So I'm not going to dwell on the need or the possibility of a just war, even in the practice of ahimsa. But I like what Swami introduced here under non-lying. He's always said truth is beneficial, but for me at least, something opened up when he used the word benevolence. And that's something I have experienced when I've had to say things that are difficult to someone from time to time. I've come to understand the difference between having kindness in your heart and in your intention, even if you have to say something difficult, as opposed to having something less than that. And if your intention is benevolent, then that's really what counts, even if what you have to say may be difficult to say. And of course the extreme image given often by Swamiji in his life of teaching is the image of Jesus driving the money changers out of the thing, out of the temple. But in any case, I'm not sure how much benevolence he was expressing, but nonetheless it has its points. I also love the thought about non-covetousness. He said, think of it this way. In your soul, you are everything. So what need do you have for anything? I just thought that was almost humorous, but a very free thought. Okay, is there another slide on this thing? Okay. The one nobody wants to talk about, but I always get, is non-sensuality, and you don't need to comment on that. Thank you very much. But what I've always... I said you didn't need to comment on this. But really, again, I've always taken heart down through the years on this with the interesting Sanskrit term of brahmacharya. And Brahma is the teacher. Acharya, we know, is teacher. And Brahma is spirit or whatever. So flowing with Brahma, and that means in many things, but when the energy is flowing up. And he also gives something very, very valuable in respect to non-sensuality, which, let's face it, most of us really know that he's talking about sexuality. I mean, food, okay, talk about food. But when ecstasy comes, food goes. So, but think of it this way. This is a wonderful thought, which is, he says that, think of touch transformed into space, and think of space transformed into bliss. And if you can touch all people, if you must think of it that way, if you can touch all space, all creation, through the agency of space, and I think of this chakra especially as the higher triad of the water element, the Swadhisthana, okay? Then you raise the Swadhisthana vibration to space, and you reach out in all space, and you are one with all, and you touch all through the vibration of space, and it's so freeing, and it's such a higher octave. It's a little bit like the lower thing of, I am everything, so why do I need anything? Well, it's on the level of touch, meaning on the touch level of feeling and experience and movement of space. It's a wonderful meditation to draw the energy of the sacral element up into the Vishuddha chakra of space and offer that energy and touch all on that level and be free. He's pretty strong on this. He describes sex desire as the font of all material desires, and I for one won't pretend to understand that, except in this way, intellectually, which is if the first power we have is the power of self-preservation, the second one is self-expansion and pleasure and happiness through the senses. So once we've beaten off tigers and other threats to our sheer survival, have a roof over our head, so to speak, and food to eat and all that sort of thing, then what we seek in life is pleasure in its various forms, higher or lower. And so in that secondary sense of the sort of almost existential powers that hold us in the body, then in that sense, it is the font of all other things. On the other side, conservation of this vital energy, without which we would be essentially dead anyway, either because our parents wouldn't have given us birth or because we would have no energy, like that joke of Master's when he was with the boys down in the basement and he said so-and-so didn't have any problems with sex energy, and one of the more cruder boys, Monk, said, yeah, but you ain't got no energy, and everybody in the room laughed because it was true, and because without this vital energy we would be all but moribund. The conservation of this vital life force, therefore, is what brings to us health and vitality and satisfactions beyond anything lower. He brought also an interesting fact. I want to move on. He said continence, complete, continence, and it takes 12 years to really master, overcome. And I'm sure that means a lot of things that we're not going to get into, but I'll just quote him. Complete self-mastery of the sex force is achieved in a cycle of Jupiter, he says. I'd never really heard that before, but it sounds good to me. I don't know what that point means, non-attachment to or what? I don't know what that means. I write these things and I forget what they mean. I think more valuable, though, is his ending aspect, which is, what do we do about loved ones? How do we deal when it comes to because the point he was making was non-attachment, of course. And how can we express non-attachment to those close to us? I mean, quite apart from sexuality entirely, but including that, sure. And that's not an easy thing to do. He gives the example, well, if your child dies and you're grieving over your dead child or dead spouse or whatever, and they're reincarnated next door, you're not going to recognize them. Well, that's sort of a gulp. What do you do with that? I don't know what you do with a statement like that because you don't recognize them. So what can you do about it? But the point is, the brutal though it be, the point is, as Buddha says in that footnote in the autobiography, and it's a staggering thought. It's just, frankly, it's repulsive to me, but it's a staggering thought. He said that the reason we should love everyone equally is because we at some time have had a relationship with everybody in creation. And if you can swallow that, you're a better person than me. But it gives you some idea of how long we've been around, and it just makes me want to upchuck and get out. Because if I have to do that, I just get depressed, frankly. So, because if I had to perfect love for everybody, oh my God, it just can't go there. Okay, so I'm joking, but and then finally, it's a very interesting. Patanjali calls the yamas, and this is worth meditating on, the great vows. I don't know what it means, but I feel something very deep in that. No matter time nor place, don't ever think you're free of these. These are the great vows that we must perfect. And it's also partly depressing, but think of it as, this is what I need to do. So, okay, so Padma. Yeah, he's going to read something.
This is number 32. Shaucha, Santosha, Tapaha, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhanani, Niyamaha. The niyamas, observances, consist of purity, contentment, austerity, accepting but not causing pain, self-study, introspection, and openness to higher truths. The niyamas, observances, consist of purity, contentment, austerity, accepting but not causing pain, self-study, introspection, and openness to higher truths.
I found it interesting reflecting on these yamas and niyamas. And, Riemann mentioned they don't come into play until the end of the second pada of the book. And because they are limbs, I don't know if I can express this clearly, but it is as if everything we've read in Patanjali up until now, everything we've studied in Patanjali up until now, we need to be experiencing and practicing before these limbs, these yamas and niyamas, can really start to bear fruit in our lives. And they don't come just one here and one there. It's not a ladder, as he said. They all sort of come together. We begin to reflect and we begin to see these things within our own ego selves, and our soul begins to reflect that back to us, and introspection comes, and we can start to work on these qualities and these attitudes and attributes. So on cleanliness, he defines cleanliness as that which obscures the presence of God. Pretty simple. Pretty much everything that we see in daily lives that pull us out into our senses and out away from recognizing the presence of God in ourselves and reflected in that which is around us. So it's a little bit like environment is stronger than will. In this one, we want to stay away from gossip and vulgarity and unkindness and coarseness. And of course, on the other side of that coin, we want to consciously place ourselves in pure and clean thought environments, uplifting music, uplifting inspirational books, people who are trying to live in the consciousness of the spiritual eye, of being focused here at the Christ Center, the Katushta Chaitanya. So we want to consciously place ourselves in those environments. I'm reminded of a time many years ago when Jamana and I were at a book publishing conference in Las Vegas. She was representing the bookstore in Menlo Park, and I was representing Crystal Clarity. And they had author breakfasts, and they had famous authors speak at those. And at this one, Angela Lansbury was speaking, and we both loved Murder, She Wrote back then. We didn't have television, but you know, my father would send me the tapes of it, and I just loved watching it. So we went to listen to Angela Lansbury, and she was just delightful and gracious and just everything you would expect her to be, very effervescent kind of person. But on the same docket with her was Donald Trump. And he came up next. And it was a really large room. It was an author breakfast, and there were probably 1,000 people sitting in the room. But even in a big room like that, I couldn't stand to be in the same room with the energy. The ego was so intense. And he just came up and started talking after her, and he was so rude, and he insulted her, and he just was so self-centered that we just got up and left. We just couldn't even stand to be around it. It's a pretty graphic example, but you don't want to hang out with a lot of ego promotion. You want to be around souls who are trying to live more and more in the spirit. Contentment, he calls the supreme virtue. And he describes interestingly how it doesn't depend on outer conditions. You're not content because you've got the spouse you want in this life, or you've got the career you want, or you've got the body you want, or, you know, those aren't the things that make us content. We want to be content in spite of these things, whether they're positive or negative in our lives, or whether we have them or don't have them in our lives. Contentment doesn't want to have to be dependent on anything outside of us. I liken it to even-mindedness. I remember Swami talks a little bit in this section also about around material wealth and money and being content whether we have it or not. And I remember for many years handling his personal finances. And it was always so interesting to me. The minute some money would be gifted to him, a big amount would come into the checkbook, and the next day he'd give it away to something. That, there was nothing left. And then the next day, another gift would come in, and it would instantly be going off to some other project. And money never landed more than 2 seconds in his wallet or his checkbook, because he always would spend it on the work or other people or, those kinds of things. And yet he always had what he needed, and he never thought about it. It just would come and it would go, because he was contented with it, and there was absolutely no attachment to it. It was just amazing to watch and observe how that worked. Austerity. Austerity is, of course, it's about accepting pain but not causing pain, the ability to take that on. Often people who lean towards austerities or who practice austerities are challenged with not becoming prideful in their austerities. I am renouncing this, and therefore I am great because I have renounced this. Somehow that thought comes in, even if we don't say it. It's a little bit like getting too mental around our austerities. I liken it to meditation. When people are too mental on meditation as a technique, they can develop great powers with their meditation and their concentration. But without the heart, we can become, we can harm ourselves and we can harm others. We can become prideful, and the ego can have an even stronger grip on us. I remember one time when somebody was complaining about something in our, the way that we do our meditations. And Kriyananda was here visiting, and I mentioned it to him, or the subject came up, and he said, when people are trying to be negative and they're spiritual, they'll find spiritual things to be negative about. The ego is very, very tricky that way, and the same can happen with our austerities if we go too much in that direction. But he does talk a lot about, he brings up the old dentist thing again, but then he goes into other things which I think are really good for all of us to consider, and especially with the critical mass of folks being on the other side of 50 in this room. We have a tendency as we get older to get more and more fixed in our likes and our dislikes. We like these kinds of foods. We don't like these kinds of foods. We like this, we like a warm room, not a cold room. We want the window open, not closed. We get really fixed in these little things. And the yogic path is about moderation. And so austerities to be practiced, sitting still and doing our asanas so that we can sit still, and then committing ourselves to an hour's meditation where we don't move. Practicing sitting in a room that's maybe a little cool and just internalizing enough that we go beyond those outer sensations. Taking something that is being offered to us food-wise that maybe is not our first preference, but why not? Be a yogi and try it and do it and try to be even-minded around it. Practice that austerity. We need to practice the yogic path is about moderation and letting go of all these likes and dislikes and these preferences. And so we need to take some time for some self-discipline in these arenas, lest we become psychological antiques. Then Swadhyaya. Swa means the self. And so it talks about introspection, but it's introspection without analysis. So we're not using our mind and judging or self-analyzing in that way. We're simply observing. And Swami very sweetly brings up the example in his own life in this stage. And he wrote this in the last year of his life. And he said, I'm not so steady on my feet anymore. And so I've actually found myself being grateful for that fact, because I have to be more careful and observant, even in walking, so that I don't make the wrong steps to fall. So I appreciate the ability to go a little slower and need to observe myself. And so that's what Swadhyaya, the principle, is behind that. To be like our own guardian angel on our shoulder, you might say, to observe, but not to necessarily judge or analyze. And then the last one is about worship, but he helps us to understand that in the sense of openness. And it's very interesting, because I would think worship, that worship goes first, right? It's all about loving God and worshiping. But he's talking about the openness to see God in everything and everywhere, and worship God in everything and everywhere. So when we say worship, we have this tendency to think, okay, I'm going to sit and chant, and now I'm going to pray and meditate, and I'm worshiping God. But that attitude of openness to God in everything and everyone, in every situation, that needs to go with us throughout the day. And it's not just, individual moments, but it's an attitude that goes with us throughout everything. So Riemann is going to talk about the siddhas of yama and niyama.
I think we can sort of blow through those pretty quickly. Patanjali identifies in a number of verses some of the things that we can look at that is appearing in our consciousness. And although we're probably not going to tame the wolf of Gubbio anytime soon, most of us, still we can find, I have students, for example, who've been doing yoga and meditation for years, and they say things like at the workplace where there's negativity, and they find people come up to them. I'm sure there's many of you who can say these things, and they say, well, gee, why are you so peaceful? And essentially, why don't you get into the gossip here at the water cooler and so forth? And so having sort of glimpses of that sort of input from friends, relatives, and co-workers is not that unusual. Satya, your word binding nature, well, I'm not sure what to say about that. Most of our words in Dwapara Yuga are pretty meaningless and vapid, so we don't have a lot of experience in this culture until Treta Yuga, when our word begins to bind nature, but maybe some of you have had that. On the other hand, we're really big about, we're big on material things, and I think a lot of people, a lot of us have the experience in our lifetimes of our needs being met when we've dedicated our lives, as many of us have, for in our entire adult life, to live on simple salaries, as many people of Ananda do around the world, and you find all things come to you as you need. It's the life of faith in all religions and all spiritual paths, and Many of us at Ananda have lived this life. So that we have experienced. Brahmacharya we've talked about, great vitality, health and memory. Many, many examples of that among yogis. Parigraha, recalling past lives, I'm not going to go there. I've met 5 Cleopatras thus far in my life. And all that sort of thing. I don't think that's very meaningful. I think we all do have some hints in our life. I'm sure that's true. But once we start talking about it, it goes downhill really quickly. So, disinclination for bodily contact. Remember when Swami some years ago announced he was going to stop hugging people? I just laughed because I had to learn to hug people back when it was the thing to do at Ananda. So then I had to finally let it go. But that's more of there's nothing you can really say about that. But it's indication of, it's partly cultural, partly habit. But think of it this way, quite apart from people, think about your relationship to massage or being touched in even that way, quite apart from other ways. When that just isn't anything you need or want or you respond to, that's a pretty high bar I would say, for most people I know. But when that just isn't where your head's at, it's not in the body, that's quite something. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not in the body. There's a difference, but we're not going to explore it. Contentment, we've talked about psychic powers, the tapasya. We're not going to talk about that. I think there's many of us who, I know I started life as a nerd, as a left brain kind of person. Not really. I just like to say that. But because it's not true, but that sort of was my self-image when I was young. I didn't really realize I had intuition. I had a lot of intuition. There's a lot of things I knew would happen in my life, and I just say that because I think others of you can say that too, and we should honor our victories. But it came slowly. But I will say that in the life of meditation, which develops intuition, I just assume I will know things now about people, about not what they say, but these things, they do come to you. And so Swami very wisely talks about how, Patanjali doesn't define those psychic powers because it sounds sort of grandiose, and you like people at East West who do readings and stuff. It's not that. It's not that at all. But you start to know things that you have no reason, quote unquote, to know. And then you start after that to begin to live that way and depend on that flow of knowledge, etc., that just appears to you, and so on. So I say that because we should live that way, and we should notice those things in ourselves, because it is true. I've always been intrigued by the Ishta Devata concept, which is the divinity that appears within us when we are ready. I don't really know what that means, but I think it's really cool. I have an inkling for what that means. I think it's very unique. I think it's very personal. I think it's a little bit like saying when the disciple is ready, the guru appears, but it's bigger than that. I think it's worth meditating on that, because at some point in our spiritual life, we eventually walk on our own 2 feet, and we may appreciate and need, I think most of us here still need very much communal worship and satsang, but there comes a point, and I look forward to it, when I will walk my own path, and that guide will be inside. And that's something that we should look for. Maybe it comes a little bit later in life. I don't really know, but that's a hope and a promise. So, okay, Ishvara Paranihana. Someday I'll be able to say it like Morley does. We're going to skip over that too. So, in the stanzas 33 and 34, just a quick thing. This is really important. This is something that Swami adds to Patanjali, and it's really the essence of the practicality of our path. Patanjali says, or Swami interprets him to say, that when you have difficulties, the antidote for our difficulties is to affirm the positive opposite qualities. Now that's sort of de rigueur for most of you, I would think, but I can assure you that in the field of meditation, and I'm thinking slightly more Buddhist meditations and other things, That's not true. On our path, I don't want to say distinguishing because I don't like to talk that way, but on our path we focus very positively on the energy in the spine, on the eyes of the Guru, we use affirmations. We have been given a huge amount of things positively to lift the energy. Not all spiritual paths do that. Think of self-flagellation, I am a sinner. You think of nothingness, emptiness, all that. I call it a little bit of crap because I don't think it's authentic. It is for some people some of the time. But our way out, it's like the way I talked about virtue. When we focus on superconsciousness, the Guru, prana, the subtle astral perceptions that Patanjali mentioned in Book 1, this is our, like that carrot, this is our, in that cute, charming, but sort of silly story of Master tells, that's our Ishta Devata in a different way. And so we need to act. It's like Krishna saying, you can't get out by not acting. Do something positive. If you're depressed, get off your butt and go to a class. Go walk around the block. Chant Hare Krishna. Do something. This is far more a great contribution to Dwapara Yuga than most of us realize when we think of how most people deal with their problems. They go to the shrink, or they take a pill, and a happy pill. Oh boy, I'm happy. Or they analyze why their mother beat them with a coat hanger like my mother did. I'm still getting over it. I used to tease her mercilessly about beating me up with a coat hanger. That didn't bother me. I used to laugh at her when she did it as a kid. She couldn't hurt me, and I was just that way as a kid. But I got to tease her about it. Oh, you ruined me. I go to the shrink all the time because you beat me with a coat hanger. Ah. So, but we've been given a real powerful path. So anyway, I just want to point these things out because they're significant and you wouldn't necessarily notice them. Okay, so stanza 50.
47.
47?
Could you read it, please?
Oh, no.
Could you all, while he's reading it, close your eyes?
Well, I think we better move on to stanza 50.
No.
No. I got carried away again. All right.
47.
Close your eyes.
Prayatna Shaikilyananta Samapatibhyam. Prayatna Shaikilyananta Samapatibhyam. By reducing one's natural tendency towards restlessness and by visualizing infinity, true posture is attained. By reducing one's natural tendency towards restlessness and by visualizing infinity, true posture is attained.
Can you read what he says after that?
Swami says, sitting very still and resisting the temptation to look around, to scratch, to shift about, to sniff or to swallow. This is the state of asana. It will help you very much to visualize infinite space all around you. My Guru counsel, after your last deliberate exhalation, when you are sitting very still, to gaze millions of miles through infinite space, to the left, to the right, before you, behind you and above. Visualize yourself seated, bodiless, suspended in vast space. And then only begin your meditation practices.
Just wanted us to get a little touch of that. Great way to start our meditations. It's like the poem of Samadhi that he recommended to the monks to memorize, just to constantly be in that vast place when we sit in meditation. Want to read stanza 50?
Bhakya abhyantara stamba Desha kala sankhyavihi parikrishto dirgha sukshmaha. The emphasis while breathing and therefore in the flow of life force may be more on inhalation, on exhalation, or on stillness. It may be on space entering the body rather than the body's breathing, or the timing of inhalation and exhalation, rapid or slow, and on the number of counts in each inflow and outflow, whether the flow be short or long. The emphasis while breathing, and therefore in the flow of life force, may be more on inhalation, on exhalation, or on stillness. It may be on space entering the body rather than on the body's breathing, on the timing of inhalation and exhalation, rapid or slow, and on the number of counts in each inflow and outflow, whether the flow be short or long.
Now in this one he goes into a discussion on prana. But I think what I want to talk about just briefly in the little time we have is the comment he makes in the description likening Hong Sa. This was really riveting for me for some reason. It just gave me an insight deeper into our practices. When he described that in Hong Sa, by concentrating here at the origin of the nose as the breath is going in and out, we are, whether we realize it or not, we're putting our attention there, and that's the point, opposite the medulla, that's the point, the spiritual eye. So we're magnetically, even in that practice, drawing ego forward into spirit, into the spiritual eye. And so it's a practice of concentration. Yes, it's a technique. Yes, it helps to bring us, it helps to internalize us and bring us into the inner life. Yes, but it helps us also in our ego transcendence, which is what will free us eventually. And so such a powerful insight into why we're actually doing this and the blessings of even the simplest technique. Oh, I want to learn to meditate. I need to not be so restless. Okay, but whether you know it or not, you're practicing something that will free you eventually. And Master said, practice it 2 hours a day correctly, and you'll be free. And he talked about those boys, those nasty little boys that he can turn into saints if they practice it correctly. the attunement comes, but also our ego transcendence comes. We magnetize all our energy to the spiritual eye. Your turn.
For those of you who are keeping up with the reading, of course, this reference is a reference to the fourth stage of the Eightfold Path, pranayama. And you can see from what Murli read that Patanjali was embracing the whole body of various pranayama practices, short, long, da-da-da-da. You know, he clearly is acknowledging the wide range of pranayama. Generally speaking, we don't speak of Hong Sa as a pranayama, but it's absolutely a pranayama. It's just not technically correct to make a reference to it that way, but people like you here, we, should understand that Hong Sa is very much a pranayama because it controls the energy and it brings us towards breathlessness, which is what all pranayamas do, including Kriya Yoga. So it's a pranayama in the deeper understanding of that which Swami explores, meaning it's the breath is the outer form of the movement of prana. But you all know that, so I don't think that's important to explore. But what the point I want to make is that Hong Sa, particularly for us, is a pranayama in the sense that, A, that Yogananda gave it to us, that's why I say us, but B, that it should incline us towards quieting of the breath and towards breathlessness. And to practice that way, it's a deeper pranayama than, most things because, in fact, we're letting it go. It's a more difficult pranayama because we're not engaging our energy in an active way, which is more comfortable to the ego and to the mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, you do all these crazy things, and they're wonderful. I do them all the time. But Hong Sa is more difficult because it takes more subtlety of concentration, more focus of the mind, which is what it specifically develops. But it is a pranayama because it will control the flow of prana. And it does so here, and Padma's pointing out, this is really, this is an important point, that the value of Hong Sa on its own merits is the relationship it has to the Gutastha Chaitanya, to here. It's, in a sense, it skips the spine and brings us right here. Now, we know, as Kriyabans, most of us, that there's a lot of work to be done down in there, so Kriya is there to help us that way. But it should not be shrugged off as a minor technique. It's a very powerful technique. And then here at the end of Book 2, then he touches on pratyahara. And two things about pranayama and pratyahara which are a little bit confusing. Number one, with pranayama, we think of breath, okay, fine. We think of prana, okay, fine. And then we think devotion, where does that come in? The heart center? Because it's a redirection of that life force inward and upward, purifying that direction, purifying that flow of prana upwards in devotion, or if you prefer, in an expansion and refinement of that prana away from ego, self-directed, self-involvement. In that way, that's the connection. Pranayama has for its goal the cessation of breath. Pratyahara has for its goal the one-pointed concentration of the mind, which is at least equally difficult, if not even more difficult to some degree. In true pratyahara, we should be able to meditate and not be bothered by outer sounds, for example, sound being the most compelling of the five senses when we're meditating, hard to get rid of. And so the quietness of heart, these two work together, in other words. You're not going to turn off those sense telephones. For example, at night, our sleep patterns change. And when our sleep patterns make that shift, when we literally fall asleep, and you can hear it if you're in bed with another person, you can hear that shift. And you can catch it in yourself, but it's much harder because they're literally falling asleep. But you can catch the shift pattern in breathing. And when we do that, then the senses turn out. The sense telephones go off. Well, that whole process is what's necessary to internalize the mind. And so the other three higher stages we'll get into next week. So we're going to end here and open it up for, we don't have admittedly all that much time, but...
I had a question last week that referred to something we did this week, right?
Yes, it was 17. It was the union of seer.
Merging of the seer and the using that aspect of it in the stanza, because there's also that part of knower, knowing, known as one, where then, I guess that's a definition of samadhi, and clearly pain is not that. So that was but I think you covered it.
Okay, I see. All right. Well, what else? Anything sort of percolating? Yeah, Rashmi.
Self-justification as one of the things to avoid. Could you explain how that fits into the
Morley, or somebody, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So the comment was, Swami often explains self-justification as
Something to avoid.
as something to avoid, and how does that fit within the framework of yamas and niyamas?
Anna, you're big on that subject.
Don't do it. I'm not quite sure how to relate it to particularly the yamas and the niyamas, except if you begin to fool yourself about whether you're actually being truthful or not, or can. Right. Let yourself be creamed, is that what he said? Well, self-justification relates more to ego transcendence, and all of these qualities eventually relate to ego transcendence, but it relates most directly to ego transcendence. We don't need to explain ourselves. God knows our intention, we know our intention, and we don't have to go further than that. And if we do, we might miss the point, because it's usually when we find ourselves wanting to justify that there's something is wrong, and hence it's good to step back and listen and watch.
But it relates potentially to each of the yamas, because self-justification can have an element of harming others, particularly if you fight back. It has an element of truthfulness. Is it true? You're defending yourself. It has an element of aparigraha, which is to say non-attachment to the ego and to the body. Can't suddenly think of the other ones, but brahmacharya, okay, that wouldn't have much to do with that. But it has aspects, depending on the circumstances, to each of the yamas, and with contentment as a niyama, self-contentment. Niyama represents inwardness of consciousness, a person who is self-contained, content, inward, and then also in terms of the devotion, number 5, the flowing up of energy. So it very much does relate, but circumstantially would depend on which button you might say is being pushed. Yeah.
Right, but let's say that you are being, you have been truthful, but you've been accused of lying. To try to justify that or to try to explain that isn't necessary, is his point. Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Yes, Masha. Here comes a doozy.
Well, I've been thinking.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
This is all, for us, this is all so intellectual, because so much of this we have not experienced, and all we can do is try to get our minds around it. And so I think you mentioned before that this really is a book for Treta Yuga. But I can't help but think that once you're in that Treta Yuga mindset, you don't need all the intellectualizing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we get it now.
Yeah, because you're experiencing it. But then that takes me to, this is not so much a question as a comment. It seems that what you would get through this is the vibration. Perhaps the words themselves, the meaning of the words themselves are not as important as the fact that Patanjali put this down, in Sanskrit, and that what we're doing when we just sit in silence and meditate on it is more important than trying to figure it out.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate, as always, your self-effacement. But I think it's both and. I think the concepts, we wouldn't be here studying this if the concepts didn't have meaning. And honestly, I was trying to encourage you earlier to claim your victories. I don't think it's just intellectual, whether for you or for most of us here. I think all of us have had some experience of these things. And the purpose of studying is to awaken the introspective aspect of our consciousness to start relating. I think part of what you're saying, and we all agree, is it's hard to relate to the sutras because they are somewhat clinical or intellectual or whatever you want to use the word. But the purpose of our studying it together is to try to ground it in that. So
I think, part of what I'm saying is it's so clinical. I guess that's a better word than intellectual. And for us, I think where we're at least most of us, we're more helped by the devotional, the concentrating on simple things. The intellectual part kind of, at least me, it gets me confused.
Okay.
But it seems like you reach a certain stage where the clinical you don't really need, but you need those vibrations from Patanjali or from your guru. And I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Sure.
The stage where
Sure.
these words in Sanskrit will...
And to plant the seeds for our further evolution. Yeah. John?
But really, like for instance, the yamas and the niyamas cover virtually every aspect of daily behavior, human behavior. I mean, they are very likened to the Ten Commandments, or those things that are not God saying don't do this or do that, but it's when you do them you feel more bliss, so you feel closer to God, and when you don't, you don't. And so they really do cover the spectrum of all of our human behavior. And I find it helpful, I don't know if you do, but reading Swamiji's explanations, however brief for some of them, helps me to understand the more clinical aspect or the more deeply intellectual. The sutras are hard to read and understand just on their own. If I were just reading only them, we couldn't be having these conversations. It's two things. It's his simple explanations in between and our life experience of actually trying to practice these teachings that helps bring them to life.
Okay, Chandi, let's finish up with Chandi.
20 years ago, when I first read the autobiography of the yogi, I remember there were so many questions that were answered in that book. 20 years later, I'm reading Patanjali, and there are so many questions that I've had to myself that are being answered in the book. So it is living for all of us. So we don't, we're in our head so much that this kind of helps us in our practice. It helps us in our daily. Are we on the right track? Are we doing the right thing? Are we answering in the right way? And I find it very inspiring, and to take a little at a time. I just wish we could stay on it.
Good, yeah. Well, I think many of us have felt that too. Also, there comes a point on the path, and many of us here have been doing these things for a great many years, when we sort of tend to dumb it down. Okay, well, let's see, I meditated, did a few kriyas this morning, and did a few before. We start, the horizon line of what's possible, let's face it, brutally true, for most people tends to narrow as the years roll by. Okay, the starry-eyed whatever begins to fade, and we need reminders of who and what we are, lest we settle for so much less. Life is such a tremendous compromise with our soul's potential that in one given life, getting beaten up enough, falling down enough, we begin to look down at the dirt and at our shoes And like Swami said about watching his feet and watching his step, we begin to think that that's sort of where it's, where it's at. And as we approach the horizon line of the ending part of life, we need to lift our gaze and understand that we are eternal. There ain't nothing that's going to be over. We go on till endlessness. We might as well get used to it. We're here to stay, whether here in this body or whatever, but we ain't going nowhere in the highest sense. We need to
Do the work.
do the work and have the courage and the devotion and to help others, etc. So that's what I have found from a reinvigoration of my own potential and how to do it. Yeah.
And so, if you want a beautiful perspective on it, Prem Shanti has something to tell us.
Well, Naya Swami and Nandi from Anand Village will be coming Friday night, November